Santana's work can be found in Latinx Screams and other horror anthologies. She is the managing editor for Kelp Journal and the moderator for a horror book club. She is a member of the Horror Writers Association. She received her MFA in fiction from the University of California, Riverside. AE, over to you.
Thank you. My name is A.E. Santana, and I'm reading an excerpt from my short story, Imperial Slaughterhouse. Lucia's hand twitched to turn the air on in her truck, but remember the AC no longer worked. Another recent issue of the old Chevy. She took a breath. The wind flowing in from the open window shot down her throat in a warm gust. In late July, on State Highway 86, from Coachella to El Centro, the desert tasted like a baked, fishy piece of wood. Past the Salton Sea, the world would become a stretch of road flanked by desert, rimmed in rocky foothills. Lucia licked her dry lips. The garbagey stench would eventually transform into the aroma of farmland, dry hay, Sudan, alfalfa, livestock, and the occasional burnt field that replenished the land. The smells of home. The underdeveloped desert forced strange thoughts into Lucia's head. Gnomes, monsters, ghosts. As a kid, her mother told her stories about El Cucuy, the boogeyman, in the closet or under the bed. Those tales were frightening and fun until Lucia shook the memory away. There were more important things happening. Her father was dying. Desert gave way to farmland. Lucia flew through the smaller agricultural towns and fields of produce. She trudged into El Centro, the city she was born and raised in, 10 miles from the U.S.-Mexico border. She pulled up to her parents' makeshift gate that surrounded the family's house and yard. She got out of the truck, the sun baking her skin, opened the gate, and got back into the truck. She parked underneath the homemade overhang, wooden beams for columns worn down from weather and age, and a tin roof rusted and sharp. She grabbed a knapsack from the back seat and headed into her childhood home. Mama! Lucia opened the front door and peeked into the living room. Mama! She closed the door behind her, the cool air kissing her hot skin. She moved toward the bedrooms to drop off her pack. Mom! Lucita! Her mother's voice drifted from the master bedroom. Oh, mija, I'm so glad you're here. Lucia walked into her parents' bedroom. Her mother, smaller, grayer than her last visit, sat on the edge of the bed with a deep blue handmade quilt that Lucia had used to lay on the ground and pretend was the ocean. Lucia sat next to her mother and embraced her. Her mother's hugs always seemed to chase away the stress and darkness that followed her. How are you doing? Lucia asked. She gripped her mother tighter, hoping to give the frail woman some of her own strength. Her mother, Rocio Luz Santiago Dominguez, shrugged her tiny shoulders beneath her daughter's arms. I'm doing, Rocio said. It's lonely here with your father in the hospital. Are you ready to go? Before Lucia answered, her mother pulled out of her arms and was up. I wanted to freshen up, Lucia said. I just drove 100 miles with no AC, so I'm kind of sweaty and gross. She ignored that she and her mother had just unselfconsciously embraced a moment ago. Your father doesn't care, Lucia said, grabbing a soft yellow cardigan that had been lying on the bed. But it's cold in the hospital, so bring a jacket. Mom, Lucia said, it's 109 degrees outside. Let me just rinse off, at least. I've waited all day, Rocio said. Your father is in the hospital. She was already getting her purse. He'd be happy to be driving around in the heat. At the hospital, Lucia and her mother entered floor 12. Lucia stared at the vinyl flooring as she shuffled her hands in her jean pockets, unprepared for the hospital's cold. Rafael, Rocio said. She darted over to her husband who sat in bed. She patted the old man's hand. Lucia is here. Lucia moved into his line of sight before her mother could snap at her. Lucia looked down at her father. Rafael Marcos Dominguez. He looked shrunken and thin. His legs seemed too short and small underneath the hospital covers. Her father's dark skin was ashen, and blotchy dark circles swam under his eyes. His hair, previously luxurious and black, with only speckles of gray, was gone. His lips drew together in a thin, choppy line. He opened his hazel eyes, tired, but still so light and beautiful. He coughed. The movement seemed to wrap his whole body. Lucia grimaced. This was her third visit to see her father in the hospital, and each time he looked reduced, as if he was disappearing. Good, Lucia thought. Papa, Lucia said, her voice calm and even. The man blinked his weary eyes and focused their beauty on his daughter. Lucita, he said, it's good to see you, mija. Lucia's feet were stuck to the floor, her hands balled into fists in her pockets. You too, Dad. Rafael turned to his wife, who vigilantly stood next to him, her hands over his. Rocio, mi amor, he said, give me some time with my daughter, please. She patted her husband's wrinkled and spotted hand. I'll be back in a moment, Rocio shuffled out, leaving Lucia in the hospital with her dying father. They were quiet for a moment. Rafael let out a sigh and shifted, uncomfortable in the bed. He straightened and looked at Lucia, his eyes suddenly distant and empty. Are you being a good girl? He asked. Lucia nodded. She stayed put, 2 feet away from the foot of his bed. Always? My little angel, he said, the one who will take me to heaven. Lucia held back a sneer. She thought about his heavy blows across her mother's face, across her own face, bruised limbs, the slashes over her back. Come here, my angel, Rafael said. Lucia bit back the urge to tell him to screw off. She moved forward, stiff and awkward in bitterness. Rafael saw the hardness in his startled eyes, a mirror of his own. A smirk danced over his once handsome features. Lucita, he said, you will take me to heaven. She wanted to stay more than an arm's length from him. Although he was shriveled and weak, memories of his lightning fast movements floated in her brain. She shrugged. Sure. Do you remember, Rafael said, when we were rich? Do you remember the big house with the pool and the tree house? Remember all the cars? Your big room with all your friends who used to come and eat all the food? Lucia gave a short nod. I paid for that, he said. I know. Rafael leaned back in the bed. We had it all. His eyes went skyward in nostalgia. Before your Tío Flaco screwed us. Tío Flaco, Thomas Renato Santiago, her mother's brother. Tío Flaco with dark eyes and an infectious laugh. Tío Flaco who always had a silly story and never hit or slapped. Tío Flaco who had said, do you know why they call you Lucia? Because you have a light inside of you. Tío Flaco who had been missing since she was 8 years old. Her father sighed, good for nothing bastard. I paid for it all, and I lost it all. Rafael trained his eyes back on his daughter. All I have is you. You'd have to read the whole story to find out what happens. Thank you.